He stood by the V-mail counter, coffee cooling beside the flag at dawn, wondering why his own order still echoed in his chest. The captain had scoffed that mercy-slowed procedure pressed him to sign the paper anyway. But when the light caught his dented canteen cup, the reflection looked back like a question, one he could finally answer. Quiet men leave echoes too. Let me take you back. The air above the Burma camp quivered like glass. Noon sun hammered the corrugated roofs until they rang, and the smell of rust and boiled rice hung heavy in the yard. Sergeant Ellis Ward's uniform, faded to the color of the dust, walked toward the well where a line of women waited with tin pails. He had rehearsed orders his whole life, clear, firm, unquestioned, but this one caught in his throat before it ever left his mouth. "Hold them back from the well," he shouted. The sound scattered through the yard, thin and metallic. A few guards turned surprised. The women stopped moving, each clutching her pail as though it might vanish. The chaplain, standing beside him under a patch of shade, looked up slowly. "Do you hear yourself, Ellis?" The question wasn't defiance. It was grief shaped into words. Ellis didn't answer. The rule had come down that morning, water strictly rationed, no exceptions. But the sight of the women, hollow-eyed, standing in the glare, made the command feel wrong the instant it left his tongue. They weren't the enemy. They were prisoners of circumstance, same as the men behind the fence. He felt the heat press on his neck, sweat sliding into the collar. His hand trembled as he reached for his canteen cup, the dented aluminum one he'd carried since North Africa. It was half full, lukewarm, barely enough for himself. The chaplain's gaze stayed on him, calm, waiting. "You could look away," the chaplain murmured. "It'd be easier." Ellis tipped the cup, letting a thin line of water fall into the dust. The liquid hissed, swallowed by earth, before it touched anyone's lips. The women stared at the dark patch spreading across the ground. One of them bowed her head. Another turned aside, whispering in a language he didn't understand. He wanted to explain, to say he was following orders, that the rations were gone, but every word tasted like metal. A fly landed on the rim of the empty cup. He brushed it away, then caught his reflection in the dull surface, a man who no longer recognized his own obedience. For a moment, nothing moved. Even the wind stopped. From somewhere beyond the huts came the faint clang of a kitchen pot, then silence again. He lowered his voice. "I didn't mean—" The chaplain finished the thought for him. "You didn't mean to become your own echo." That cut deeper than any reprimand. Ellis turned toward the well. The women were still there, eyes down, waiting for permission that would not come. Behind him, a crow cawed from the watchtower, and the guard on duty shifted uneasily. "You should step back, Sergeant," the guard warned. Ellis nodded, retreating 3 paces as though distance could mend the command he'd already given. He felt every eye on him, the soldiers, the prisoners, even the chaplain, measuring the space between duty and mercy. A gust of wind lifted the dust again, turning the sunlight into shards. The reflection of it stung his eyes, and in that brightness he saw how absurd the order had sounded. Hold them back from the well. Hold them back from water, from life. The words were still hanging in the air like smoke he couldn't clear. He swallowed hard. "Orders are orders," he said at last, but the sentence landed flat, without conviction. The chaplain touched his sleeve. "Sometimes obedience is just fear in uniform." Ellis looked down at the empty cup in his hand. The last drop rolled along the rim and fell, darkening the dust at his boots. The camp bell rang for midday muster. He turned to leave, shoulders squared, every step heavier than the one before. He had obeyed, but something inside refused. Night laid its film over the Burma camp, the kind of heat that never truly left even after sunset. Lamps sputtered along the walk, throwing cones of yellow light onto mud and wire. Beyond the inner fence came the low rhythm of coughing, a woman's, then another's dry hoarse, fading back into the dark. The insects filled every pause with their own thin percussion. Sergeant Ellis Ward moved quietly along the perimeter, boots scuffing the dust into whispers. Officially, he was checking locks, a routine patrol logged every hour. In truth, he was listening. The sound of those coughs had followed him all evening, threading through the memory of his own order from that afternoon. Hold them back from the well. The words still burned. He stopped at the section where 2 fences met at a crooked angle. Between the strands of rusted wire, the ground dipped toward a drainage ditch. He crouched, unhooked his canteen cup from his belt, and poured what water he had left. The cup caught the reflection of the guard lamp, a small, trembling moon in tin. From the shadows beyond the mesh came a shape, a hand first thin and shaking, then another behind it. He hesitated. Regulation forbade any personal contact. The order had his own name under it. He should turn away, log the incident, move on. Instead, he pushed the cup beneath the bottom wire. The metal scraped lightly, a sound that seemed louder than gunfire in the stillness. The hands found it, steadied it. He heard water tilt, then the faintest gasp as someone drank. No faces, only breath meeting breath through the fence. He didn't speak. Neither did they. The exchange lasted seconds, maybe less, but it stretched like mercy often does, too long for rules, too short for peace. A voice cut through the night behind him. "Ward, you there?" He froze. Another sergeant doing his own round boots, squelching toward him. Ellis straightened, fast flicked the chain at the gate. "Just checking the lock, sir," he said, keeping his tone flat. The other man yawned. "Make sure it's tight. Heard the civvy's been edging close." "Yes, sir." The footsteps receded, swallowed by darkness. Ellis waited until the last echo faded before kneeling again. The cup slid back under the wire, empty now, wet with fingerprints he'd never see. He wiped it on his sleeve and hooked it to his belt. Rain began a slow tapping on the roofs, hesitant as apology. The first drops hit the tin above him, soft, then faster, until the sound blurred into a single sheet of rhythm. The camp smelled suddenly alive mud smoke and the metallic sweetness of new rain. He tilted his head back, letting the drops cool his face. Somewhere across the yard, a generator coughed and died, plunging half the barracks into darkness. He could barely see the fence now, only the silver glint where the wire caught the lightning. But he could feel the space between that thin strip of no man's land where duty ended and conscience began. Still, he whispered, not sure if he meant for the rain or for himself. The chaplain's words from earlier returned. Sometimes obedience is just fear in uniform. He closed his eyes, hearing the women on the other side whisper, thanks he could not understand. When the lamp flared again, he was already walking back toward the huts, soaked through the empty cup, tapping softly against his leg. The report he'd file at dawn would read, perimeter checked, all secure. But as he passed the chapel tent and heard the first drops slide off the canvas like sighs, he realized security had nothing to do with fences. Duty for once felt lighter than guilt. Dawn seeped into the camp like thin smoke, pale and colorless. Rumors moved faster than the wind. The war might be over the Japanese, ready to surrender. No one said it aloud where the guards could hear, but every man in the yard worked slower, listening for a sound that might confirm it, a broadcast, a cheer, a single change in tone. Ellis Ward sat on a crate outside the supply hut, rolling his sleeves and waiting for the clerk to finish sorting mail. The man looked exhausted, hands stained with ink, stacking envelopes like rations. When the bundle slipped paper scattered across the floor, tan V-mail sheets folded tight, their corners soft from humidity. One fluttered to Ellis's boots. He bent to pick it up. The address written in a looping hand stopped him cold. Dear Mother in Wiltshire. It wasn't meant for him, but something about it felt near, almost familiar, the same county as his own, the same slow script his mother used. He turned it over. The return mark had no name, only a number, and the faint blue stamp of a POW camp farther north. He hesitated, then slid the envelope into his pocket. The clerk didn't notice. Inside his quarters that night, lantern light made the bamboo walls glow like old parchment. Rain whispered through the eaves, steady as breath. He opened the letter carefully, edges cracking from damp. The handwriting slanted, unsteady, but proud. To my mother, if this reaches you, tell the kind British soldier that we remember him. He shared his water through the wire when we thought we would die of thirst. I never learned his name. Perhaps he doesn't wish to be known. But mercy has a face, even when we cannot see it. The rest was smudged by water or tears, he couldn't tell which. The words blurred into the lantern glow, but their weight was clear. He set the page beside his canteen cup, still dented from years of service, the same cup that had passed under the fence 2 nights before. For the first time since he'd arrived in Burma, the two things, metal and paper, seemed connected, one completing the other. The cup had carried mercy. The letter carried proof. The flap of the tent rustled, and the chaplain stepped inside, brushing off the rain. "You're still awake?" Ellis looked up, caught like a boy with a secret. "Couldn't sleep." The chaplain noticed the open letter and nodded toward it. "Bad news." He shook his head. "No. It's thanks." The older man smiled, the kind of weary smile that knew what gratitude cost in a place like this. "Some orders aren't written down, son." Ellis stared at the words again, tracing the ink grooves with his thumb. Outside, thunder rolled far away, a slow reminder that the storm had not yet left. He folded the letter neatly, pressed it against the cool side of the cup, and wrapped both inside his handkerchief. The gesture felt like a small ceremony, not defiance, not guilt, just acknowledgement. He slipped the bundle into his breast pocket. The metal touched skin cold and grounding. In the distance, a guard coughed, a dog barked once, and the rain found every crack in the roof. Each drop drummed a rhythm above him, steady and forgiving. He whispered into the dark, "For what it's worth, I did see them." The lantern flickered, then steadied. Water ran through the bamboo eaves in silver threads, carrying the dust of yesterday's orders away. Somewhere in Wiltshire, a mother would one day open her daughter's letter and read of an unnamed soldier who shared his water. And maybe he thought that would be enough. Morning rose gray over the camp, the sky heavy with unfinished rain. Trucks idled in a row beyond the huts, coughing smoke that smelled of oil and endings. Orders cracked through the air. Form ranks, count off each syllable, a hammer to the chest. The evacuation had begun. Sergeant Ellis Ward stood by the admin table, clipboard in hand, his own signature stamped across the page authorizing transfer of non-essential civilian prisoners. Beside that clause sat his initials, "Neat Final." He'd signed it last night without thinking. Paperwork had a way of hiding the weight of things. Now he saw them, the POW women, moving in a slow, uneven line toward the trucks. Their clothes hung like flags after rain, colorless, limp. One stumbled, another helped her, both trying to keep pace. The sight hit him like a sound he'd been refusing to hear. Ward, an officer, barked, "Get them moving. We've got a timetable." He didn't move. The clipboard felt heavier than a rifle. Around him the yard spun with motion guards, shouting, engines revving, but inside he was pinned not by chains or fear, but by protocol, his own handwriting, his own approval, his own permission to stay blind. Rain began again, thin needles on tin roofs. He looked up, watching drops gather at the edge before breaking free. The water streaked through dust, carving tiny paths that disappeared into the mud. That's when he understood what he'd missed all along. He stepped forward. "Wait." The officer turned. What now? Ellis didn't answer. He unhooked his canteen cup, filled it from the barrel near the supply tent, and walked straight to the first woman in line. Her eyes widened, but she didn't speak. He lifted the cup steady, and she drank slowly, gratefully, as if afraid the moment would vanish. Then he moved to the next, then the next. No one dared stop him. The yard fell silent, except for the rain tapping metal and the sound of water being passed from one parched soul to another. Even the officer who'd shouted earlier stood frozen, the brim of his cap dripping. Someone whispered behind him, "Sir." He didn't turn. He only said quietly, "Carry on." When the last woman finished, he poured the final drops into the dirt where they'd stood. The mud swallowed it like an oath. The chaplain, watching from the chapel steps, gave a small nod. No salute, no words, just that. Ellis slipped the cup back onto his belt, the dent catching the dim light. He could feel his pulse in his throat, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was release. Later, when the trucks rolled out and the yard emptied, he sat under the eaves, sharpening a nail on a whetstone. With careful strokes, he scratched 2 letters onto the bottom of the cup, the initials of the woman who had first reached through the fence. The rain washed the filings away. He turned the cup in his hands, tracing the rough metal. The reflection that stared back at him was not a soldier or a guard, only a man who had finally obeyed the right command. He understood his own order at last. The rain had followed him all the way to Wiltshire. It wasn't a storm anymore, just a steady, familiar drizzle tapping the roofs of the old village. November 11th, 1970, Armistice Day. The kind of gray morning England seemed built for. Ellis Ward parked his motorbike outside the stone church, the one where he'd once been christened, and sat for a long minute with the engine ticking down. The rain hissed on the exhaust pipe. He ran a thumb along the shape in his coat pocket, a dented canteen cup, the edges polished smooth from years of handling, and beside it, his campaign medal still threaded on the original ribbon. Two things that weighed the same, though one was never meant to. Inside the church smelled of wet coats and brass polish. The organ murmured through a hymn older than anyone present. Rows of villagers filled the pews, faces lined with time, a few in uniform, most just in Sunday best. Children fidgeted. Old men bowed their heads. The chaplain, older now, white-haired voice like paper, stood at the lectern. He nodded when he saw Ellis enter, as if they'd only parted last week. Ellis walked up the center aisle, each step echoing against stone. At the altar rail he paused, unbuttoned his coat, and drew out the medal and the cup. The sound of the metal against the wood was soft but final. He set them side by side beneath a small card he'd written the night before for those who thirsted. A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. The chaplain said nothing, only adjusted his spectacles and let the silence speak. The organ quieted, leaving the faint patter of rain against stained glass. From the front pew, a young boy whispered to his mother loud enough for the sanctuary to hear. Was he a hero? The chaplain's smile was thin but warm. He remembered, he said. The words hung in the air, simple as a benediction. Ellis looked down at the cup at the twin initials scratched on its base, now half hidden by candlelight. He hadn't planned to leave it there, but the decision felt right. The metal beside it gleamed faintly, its ribbon faded to the color of dusk. After the service, people lingered by the doors, shaking hands, whispering condolences they didn't owe him. One woman offered tea in the fellowship hall. He followed her there, sitting among the chatter and the scent of biscuits. Someone joked about the British weather, he answered with a small smile. Tea's gone cold, he said, glancing into his cup, same as old orders. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it broke the tension. For the first time in years, he felt the weight on his chest ease. When he finally left, the rain had stopped. Sunlight pushed through the clouds, scattering color through the church windows. On the far wall, the stained glass cast tiny bands of red and gold across the altar, landing squarely on the canteen cup. Its surface caught the light, throwing it back like a promise kept. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, and let the quiet fill him. The village bell began to toll for the 11th hour, each note a heartbeat of remembrance. Behind him, the reflection of rain on glass shimmered over metal and wood, the line between them fading into one. Justice, he thought, was never about victory. It was about remembering to give water when someone thirsted. Morning light fell through the museum's high windows, soft and forgiving. May 2025, the 80th year since the Burma evacuation. The village museum had once been a schoolhouse. Now its halls were filled with uniforms, telegrams, and faded photographs of men and women who'd outlasted the war and the silence that followed it. A small crew of university students unpacked tripods and cables. The hum of their equipment blended with the rain outside, a familiar rhythm tapping the old slate roof. One of them, a young woman with headphones around her neck, squinted at the display case near the entrance. Inside lay a canteen cup, dulled by time, resting beside a folded V-mail letter under a wash of museum light. Between them sat a card. In mercy, we stand together for the POW women, 1945 to 2025. She leaned closer. Is this the real one? The archivist, an older man in a tweed vest, nodded. The very same, found in the church archive after the war. He scratched 2 initials on it, never said whose. The letter came with it. Was he punished for helping them? Another student asked, adjusting the camera. The archivist smiled faintly. He was never punished. He was remembered. Outside, thunder murmured far off and the rain grew steadier. On one of the monitors, a file loaded a grainy clip from 1945, the camp filmed after liberation. Rain hissed against tin roofs. Men moved like ghosts through the wreckage. In the background, a voice, the chaplain's, maybe reading the names of the missing. The sound bled through the speakers until the present and the past seemed to breathe together. The student director whispered, "That's the same rain, isn't it?" "Feels like it," the archivist said. He looked again at the inscription on the case, the reflection of the light trembling across the metal. For a moment he could almost see the figure of a soldier standing in that reflection, cup in hand, rain on his face, the kind of mercy that rewrites orders long after the ink has faded. The camera light blinked red. The girl at the mic adjusted her script, and the final line of the documentary found its place clear and simple. Some orders you obey by breaking them gently.